Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. What happens to society when the world's most prestigious universities are forced to teach middle school math to their incoming freshmen?
Well, the crazy thing is we don't even have to guess anymore. I mean, it's literally playing out inside global lecture halls right now as we speak.
Exactly. So our goal today is to really dig into this, frankly, alarming article from The Economist. It's titled, Students Are Doing Worse Than You Think. And
Mhm.
we've also got a bunch of background notes that paint a much larger and, honestly, way more unsettling picture.
Yeah, it's a huge issue.
Right, but I want to set the tone for this right away. We are not just going to sit here reciting depressing stats and, wagging our fingers at kids these days.
Right, no get off my lawn rants today.
Exactly. We are going to actively challenge how this whole academic crisis is being framed. Because if you're listening, you've probably seen the headlines blaming smartphones or the pandemic for lower test scores.
Oh, absolutely, the classic scapegoats.
Yeah, but we have to ask, is this really just a story about failing students? Or is it actually a story about these legacy institutions actively covering up a massive systemic failure, basically just to keep the tuition checks clearing?
Oof. Yeah, that tension right there between the public image of higher ed and the private reality, that is the absolute crux of the issue.
It really is.
Because think about it. When you picture elite universities, you think of like ID-covered walls, billion-dollar endowments, acceptance rates that are basically microscopic.
Right, the whole illusion of academic invincibility.
Exactly. But when you bypass all those glossy admissions brochures and look at the actual day-to-day reality inside the classrooms, the foundation is, well, it's cracking.
It's crumbling. Let's actually start on the ground in California. So the University of California system, specifically campuses like Berkeley and San Diego, these are basically the royalty of public universities globally.
Oh, for sure. Top tier.
Right. And recently, more than 1,800 math and science lecturers across that system signed this open letter. And they didn't just say, oh, we're a little concerned. They essentially smashed the emergency glass.
Yeah, the numbers they reported are wild.
They really are. At UC Berkeley, they're reporting that 20 to 30% of students in early calculus courses are showing up with what they call severe preparation deficits.
20 to 30%. That's huge.
It is. Instructors are literally being forced to pause university-level instruction just to reteach middle school math. Like, just sit with that for a second. Berkeley is one of the hardest schools to get into on the planet.
Yeah, it's hyper-competitive.
So to require middle school math remediation when you finally get there, it's kind of like qualifying for the Olympics, but when you arrive at the starting block, you need your coach to show you how to tie your shoes.
That is a perfect analogy. And, if you look at the report from UC San Diego, it pushes that reality even further.
Oh, it gets worse.
Oh, yeah. Academics there found that the number of incoming freshmen with below high school math skills, it didn't just inch up a little bit. It jumped nearly 30-fold in just half a decade.
30-fold. That's not a trend, that's a collapse.
Exactly. It's now at almost 1 in 8 students. And the depth of the deficit is what's really terrifying the faculty. Because of those struggling students, 70% aren't even performing at the level expected of a 14-year-old.
Wow. But you would kind of assume this is strictly a STEM problem, right? Because math is notoriously cumulative. Like, if you miss a step in algebra, you obviously can't do calculus.
Right, that makes logical sense.
Mm-hmm.
But the exact same alarm bells are actually ringing in the humanities.
Really?
Yeah. Over at Harvard, humanities and social science professors are officially reporting that they're shortening reading assignments. The faculty notes explicitly say that students just lack the focus to read complex prose.
The same prose that undergrads were breezing through just 10 years ago.
Exactly. They are fundamentally altering the curriculum just to accommodate this shrinking attention span.
Okay, but I have to push back on the framing here. Like, the Economist article suggests the students themselves are just doing worse. But I really question whether the students are actually less capable or if the K-12 education system is just totally failing them.
Just stamping the diploma and moving them along.
Exactly, passing the buck to the universities.
Well, to figure out if this is just a localized failure of the American K-12 system passing the buck, we really have to look beyond just, Californian and Ivy League anecdotes. We need the global data.
Right, so what does the global data actually say?
So the OECD runs this thing called the Survey of Adult Skills. Their latest massive data set just came out at the end of 2024. And they tested about 160,000 people across dozens of mostly rich countries.
Okay.
And they divide the test takers into 5 levels of competence. Level 1 indicates the skill level of a 10-year-old basically at the end of primary school.
Okay, let's ground that in reality for the listener. If you are operating at level 1 literacy out in the real world, it means you can read and make sense of the basic instructions on a pill bottle.
Right. Very basic comprehension.
And for numeracy, it means you can do practical everyday math, like just figuring out how much wallpaper you need to buy to redecorate a single room. We are talking about absolute basic survival skills in a modern economy.
Exactly. And when researchers isolated the data for people under 35 who were actively enrolled in tertiary education, so university and college students, the numbers were jarring.
Hit me.
Across all these rich countries globally, 8% of university students scored at this 10-year-old level 1 in literacy.
8%.
Yeah, and the share is roughly the same for numeracy. What's worse, the share of poor performers in literacy has literally doubled in just over a decade.
Wait, to my point earlier about this maybe being a systemic policy failure rather than just like a biological generational shift, isn't the country breakdown pretty uneven?
Oh, it's wildly uneven. Estonia, for instance, is thriving. Fewer than 2% of their university students are at that bottom bar.
Wow, okay.
And the UK is performing better than the global average, and they're actually actively improving.
Yeah, I was looking at that country breakdown too, and the U.S. numbers are, frankly, just embarrassing by comparison.
They really are.
In the U.S., 1 in 7 college students scored at or below primary school reading levels. A decade ago, that was just 1 in 20.
It's a huge jump.
And for math, almost 1 in 5 American university students are at the absolute bottom level. Now, the Economist article leans heavily into the pandemic to explain this, right?
Yeah, they cite the 20-week national school closures, quarantines, remote learning. They even quote a professor at Pepperdine University who said that in the years right after the closures, it was as if the students simply hadn't gone to high school at all.
Look, the pandemic undeniably caused massive disruptions. I get that.
Yeah.
And the article does build a really strong case around how screens have displaced nourishing hobbies.
Right. They note that the share of 9-year-olds who read for pleasure plummeted from nearly 60% in the 90s to just 37% today. Smartphones and social media have definitely fractured sustained attention.
Sure, I see the logic there. But emphasizing the pandemic and screen time, I feel like it gives the universities entirely too much of a pass.
How do you mean?
Well, test scores like the NAEP, which is basically America's national report card, and the PISA exams, which track global student performance, those were already dropping before COVID-19.
That's true. The trend was already there.
Right. The pandemic was an accelerant, but it wasn't the spark. So I want to bring in a critical angle from the background data. We really need to talk about the raw financial incentive of just keeping butts in seats.
Ah, the business model of higher ed.
Exactly. Across the rich world, the demographic pool of 18-year-olds is shrinking, and universities are basically massive corporate businesses now.
100%.
If you have a shrinking pool of applicants, but you still need the exact same massive amount of tuition revenue to keep the lights on and pay this bloated administration, you are financially incentivized to quietly lower the bar just to keep enrollment high.
Right. They aren't just these passive victims of a generation addicted to TikTok. They're making active choices. And that financial imperative, it changes the entire dynamic of how these universities operate. If an institution needs to admit unprepared students just to hit their revenue targets, they have to justify letting those students in without looking like they are, compromising their elite standards.
Right. You can't tarnish the brand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the most effective way colleges have managed this over the last few years is by systematically dismantling the very tools the public uses to measure academic competence.
Yes, and this is exactly where we get into the whole admissions black box. Before the pandemic, more than 50% of bachelor-granting universities in the U.S. required applicants to take a standardized test, like the SAT or ACT.
Right.
Today, that number is down to just 10%. Now, it was initially dropped under the guise of COVID-19 safety, which honestly made sense at the time. You couldn't shove hundreds of kids into a poorly ventilated gymnasium.
Yeah, nobody was arguing with that in 2020.
But then, it was extended indefinitely under the banner of equity. Universities started arguing that the tests were inherently biased. But dropping those standardized metrics conveniently allowed institutions to do exactly what their business models required.
Which is to simply fill seats.
Exactly. Fill seats and shape campus demographics with absolutely zero external accountability. Like, okay, it's exactly like removing the speedometer from your car, noticing that you aren't getting speeding tickets anymore, and proudly declaring to everyone that you've solved your speeding problem.
That is brilliant. And the danger of driving without that speedometer is that you inevitably crash into reality. Which brings us to the metrics universities claim to be using instead.
Right, the high school transcripts.
Exactly. The whole justification for dropping standardized tests relies heavily on this assumption that high school grades are a valid, rigorous replacement.
But they're not.
They absolutely are not. High school grades are experiencing historic, wild inflation right now. Many U.S. states and local districts have actively lowered the academic thresholds required just to graduate.
Often because they need to secure state funding that's tied to those graduation rates.
Precisely. And the most glaring proof of this grade inflation brings us right back to that UC San Diego data.
Oh man, this stat is crazy.
It is. Of that massive group of students in the weakest remedial math class, the ones performing below a 14-year-old level, a full 25% of them had earned perfect math scores in their final years of high school.
A quarter of them. That single statistic completely unravels the entire narrative.
Totally destroys it.
Because if a perfect high school math score translates to needing remedial middle school math your freshman year of college, the high school transcript is quite literally a work of fiction.
Yeah, it's not worth the paper it's printed on.
Which creates this massive glaring tension for higher ed. If universities remove standardized tests to promote fairness, but the high school grades they are now relying on are entirely divorced from reality, how can the admissions process be anything other than totally arbitrary?
Well, Mina Aganagic, who is a math professor at Berkeley and co-authored that open letter we discussed earlier, she explicitly points this out. She literally calls modern admissions a total black box.
A black box.
Yeah, and she also notes that the other remaining pillar of admissions, the application essay, has been rendered basically workless too.
Because of AI.
Partly, yes. Historically, these essays were heavily coached and edited by affluent parents or private tutors, which was an equity issue in itself. But today, a flawless, highly compelling admissions essay can be generated by artificial intelligence in about 3 seconds.
So the gatekeeping mechanisms have just completely collapsed.
Completely.
Okay, so you have a system where the thermometer is totally broken. We see clearly how deeply unprepared students are gaining entry into these prestigious institutions. Now we have to examine the cover-up that happens once they are actually on campus.
Right. What happens next?
Because universities are terrified of exposing this systemic failure. It threatens their brand prestige. It threatens their tuition model. So what do? They simply inflate the grades at the college level, too.
Yep. The inflation just travels up the chain.
And this entire cover-up is now being supercharged by AI.
It really is. Higher education grade inflation is rampant, and it's global. Just look at the UK data for 2025. Currently, 30% of bachelor students receive a first-class degree. That's essentially the UK equivalent of a 4.0 GPA.
30%.
Right. And back in 1995, only 7% of students achieved that mark.
Wow.
Over at Yale, in the 2022 to 2023 academic year, an astonishing 79% of all grades given out were either an A or an A-.
79%. So basically, if you just show up, you get an A.
Pretty much. And the breakdown across departments is incredibly revealing. The rate of A's was lowest in economics, hovering around 50%. But in the humanities, ethnic studies, and education studies, the rate of A's was well above 80%. Yale's own senior academics recently went on record admitting that decades of grade inflation have rendered their entire grading system almost meaningless.
Now, if you're listening to this and you're outside the academic bubble, you might be wondering, why are professors doing this? Why hand out all these A's?
It's a survival tactic.
Exactly. There was this really frank report from the Dean of Undergraduate Studies at Harvard, and it laid out the mechanics perfectly. It all comes down to the modern university treating the student as a customer.
Customer service education.
Right. Professors are genuinely scared to give bad grades. Students today have been shielded from mediocre marks their entire lives, so when they get a C, they are so much more aggressive about appealing it or filing formal complaints.
Yeah, they treat it like a defective product they bought.
Yes. And for faculty, especially adjuncts who work on temporary contracts, giving honest, critical grades often results in bad student evaluations. And those evaluations directly dictate whether their contract is renewed or whether a tenure-track professor gets promoted.
And the institutional support structure for faculty discipline has just totally eroded. Faculty know that if a student complains about course rigor, the university administrators are highly unlikely to back the professor.
They'll throw the professor right under the bus.
Exactly. Plus, you have these new academic trends like ungrading or contract-based learning emerging. These progressive pedagogical models often make it procedurally easier to just give everyone an A. It basically masks the conflict entirely under the guise of alternative assessment.
Wow. Okay, so into this wild environment of fear, guaranteed A's, and administrative appeasement enters ChatGPT. It is the ultimate catalyst.
It's gasoline on the fire.
Literally. A UK think tank called API recently surveyed undergraduates and found that 94% report using AI to help with assessed work.
94%. Practically everyone.
Right. And 12% admit to pasting AI-generated text directly into their coursework without changing a single word.
It's just brazen.
In the U.S., a recent study tracked cheating rates and found that economics and journalism students actually cheat the most, at 17% and 16% respectively. Which, by the way, the irony of journalism students leading the pack in plagiarism is really hard to ignore.
Yeah, that's deeply concerning for the future of news. But really, the most definitive proof of how AI is directly impacting this grade inflation comes from Dr. Igor Chirikov at Berkeley.
Oh, the Texas study, right?
Yes. He analyzed 500,000 individual grades at a massive university in Texas, tracking data between 2018 and 2025. He mapped out the timeline, and the shift is stark.
What did he find?
Right after ChatGPT launched to the public, the number of A grades in subjects that AI is highly capable of completing, like writing essays and basic coding, soared by 13 percentage points.
Wow.
That is a 30% increase from the baseline, happening almost overnight.
That's insane.
And crucially, his study controlled for other factors by looking at subjects where chatbots aren't useful, right? Like hands-on lab work or advanced abstract mathematics. In those AI-resistant subjects, there was no similar inflation.
So the correlation is just undeniable.
Absolutely undeniable. The AI is doing the heavy lifting, and the universities are rewarding it with top-tier grades.
Now, the Economist article describes the attitude of professors who just kind of accept this AI integration as surrender. They quote, academics basically shrugging, arguing that students don't need basic writing or analytical skills anymore because they're just going to be tweaking AI outputs in their future corporate jobs anyway.
Yeah, they call that surrender.
Right. The publication calls it surrender. But I have a provocative counter-argument to present here.
Oh, let's hear it.
I don't think it's surrender at all. I think it is a highly rational adaptation by the students.
Okay, I'm listening.
If you're listening to this and you are currently a student, just think about the system you've been placed into. You are operating in a purely transactional environment where future employers run your resume through an automated filter that discards anything below a 3.5 GPA. You are taking classes with professors who are financially and professionally incentivized to avoid grading you harshly. And you have a free tool on your laptop that can do the work instantly. Under those systemic conditions, using AI to get an A isn't some sort of moral failure. It is the most logical, efficient thing you can possibly do.
You know, from a purely game theory perspective, you're right. If the institution has abandoned the rigorous assessment of actual knowledge in favor of just, credential generation, the student is simply optimizing for the credential.
Exactly.
You can't really blame the student for playing the game flawlessly when the university is the one that wrote the broken rules. But this dynamic raises an existential question about the long-term viability of the university as an institution.
Right.
Well, the core product of a university isn't really education. It's the signaling of competence to the labor market. If a degree no longer reliably signals that a graduate possesses fundamental skills, the market value of that credential will eventually collapse.
The university system has effectively hollowed itself out from the inside. Like, they're taking in a shrinking demographic of students who increasingly lack fundamental middle school skills. They're hiding that fact from the public by dropping standardized diagnostic tests, and then they're churning those students through a customer service model of education, outputting them with artificially perfect GPAs that are heavily subsidized by artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and that reality is forcing a reckoning. Employers are already starting to notice the disconnect between the pristine transcripts of new hires and their actual ability to perform complex, unassisted tasks in the workplace.
Right. Which brings us to a final compelling concept for you to chew on as we wrap up today. If a prestigious university degree no longer guarantees that the graduate possesses basic literacy or numeracy,
Which the data clearly shows it doesn't.
Right. And if straight A transcripts are easily bought with a clever ChatGPT prompt and a professor's fear of bad evaluations, what happens next in the real world?
That is the million-dollar question.
Will we see a near future where top-tier employers just entirely ignore university degrees? Will companies be forced to abandon the college credential altogether and instead return to a system where applicants have to take intense, highly proctored, company-run entrance exams just to prove they can actually read, write, and synthesize information? Because if the universities refuse to be the gatekeepers of competence, the free market will inevitably build its own gates.
It absolutely will.
Thanks for listening. Follow us for daily insights into world affairs, and don't forget to like, comment, and share.